Malcolm Carter bolted from the splintered park bench, his boots pounding the cracked earth as the humid Birmingham air clung to his skin like a damp shroud. His 12-year-old son, Isaiah, writhed under the weight of two white cops, their sweat soaked, uniforms sticking to their broad frames as they pressed him into the asphalt. Blood smeared Isaiah's cheek, a jagged red line from his nose to his jaw, staining the ground beneath him. The crowd around the court murmured, phones trembling in their hands, but no one moved closer, fear locking their feet in place. Malcolm's chest burned, his deep brown eyes narrowing into slits of cold fury as he closed the 30-foot gap. His 6'3" frame still carried the coiled strength of his Delta Force days muscles, taut beneath his faded black t-shirt, though flecks of grey now peppered his close-cropped hair. "Get off my son," he roared, his voice a low, guttural growl slicing through the thick afternoon heat. The words weren't loud, but they landed with the weight of a loaded rifle, a promise stitched into every syllable. The shorter cop, Brett Dawson, with a buzz cut and a gut straining his belt, glanced up, his lips curling into a smirk as he kept his knee planted on Isaiah's spine. "Well, look who's playing tough guy," he drawled, his southern accent thick with scorn. "Teach your kid not to run at us next time, huh?" Nathan Holt, the taller one with a lean frame and a hawkish nose, stepped forward, his hand resting on his baton, his cold blue eyes sizing Malcolm up. "Back off, boy," he snapped, the slur dripping like venom from his tongue. "Interfere and you're done." Isaiah's whimpers sharpened his small hands, clawing at the pavement nails, scraping uselessly against the rough surface. Something. Inside, Malcolm snapped a fracture in the wall he'd built around the killer he'd locked away 15 years ago. He took a step closer, his broad shoulders, squared hands loose at his sides, but trembling with barely contained rage. "I said, get off him." The crowd hushed, their phones still rolling, capturing every second as the air thickened with tension, a storm about to break. Dawson barked a harsh laugh, finally lifting his knee, yanking Isaiah up by the arm like a broken toy. The boy stumbled, tears streaking his face, his skinny legs wobbling beneath him. Malcolm lunged forward, catching him before he hit the ground again, pulling him close, feeling Isaiah's shaking body against his chest, the faint wheeze of his breath as he clutched his ribs. "You okay, little man?" Malcolm murmured, his voice softening for a heartbeat as he brushed a hand over Isaiah's sweat-damp hair. But his eyes never left the cop's twin daggers, honed by years of staring down death. Dawson adjusted his sunglasses, grinning like he'd won a bet. "You're nobody. Tough guy. Keep running that mouth and we'll haul you in for resisting." Holt nodded, cracking his knuckles, his baton tapping his thigh. "Maybe teach him some manners while we're at it." The threat hung heavy, a coil of malice tightening around them. The crowd muttered, a mix of fear and anger rippling through the park, but no one dared step forward. Malcolm stood, lifting Isaiah. Into his arms, his son's weight, a grounding force against the fire blazing inside him. He locked eyes with Dawson, then Holt, his gaze a blade cutting through their smug faces. "You've crossed a line," he said, his tone so quiet it barely stirred the air, but it struck like a gunshot. "You'll regret this." The cops scoffed, turning back to their cruiser with lazy strides, tossing taunts over their shoulders. "Empty threats, huh?" Dawson called, slapping Holt's back as they climbed inside. "See you around, boy." The engine roared, tires squealing as they peeled away, leaving the park in stunned silence. Neighbors rushed to Malcolm, their voices overlapping with concern, but he barely heard them, his focus locked on Isaiah's tear-streaked face. "They hurt." "Me, Dad?" the boy whispered, clutching his side, his brown eyes wide with pain. Malcolm's jaw tightened, a muscle ticking beneath his dark skin as he carried Isaiah back to their modest brick house 2 blocks away. The 2-story home sat at the edge of the black neighborhood, its paint chipped, but the lawn neat, a sanctuary he'd built after leaving the military. He set Isaiah on the couch with a gentleness that belied the storm in his chest, grabbing an ice pack from the freezer and pressing it to the boy's bruised cheek. "Rest, little man," he said, brushing a hand over Isaiah's hair. "I've got this." The house grew still as dusk settled, the hum of cicadas outside, a stark contrast to the chaos of the day. Isaiah slept fitfully on the couch, his small form curled under a blanket, while Malcolm paced the kitchen, his mind racing. He'd locked away the killer inside him, traded covert ops for a steady gig running Carter's Cuts, a barbershop he'd opened 5 years ago with savings from his pension. He'd sworn to give Isaiah a life free of shadows, a life where basketball games replaced Battlefield's bedtime stories erased bloodshed. But now that oath cracked like brittle glass. Those cops had torn it apart in seconds with their boots and their slurs. He descended to the basement, his steps silent but deliberate, flipping on a single bulb that cast long shadows across the concrete walls. Kneeling by a locked steel cabinet hidden behind a stack of paint cans, he punched in a code only he knew. The door swung open, revealing a stash of military gear, a tactical vest, night vision goggles, a silenced pistol, and a laptop rigged for covert ops. His fingers traced the vest's worn fabric memories, flooding back jungles thick with rain deserts, scorched by sun targets erased without a trace. He'd been the best a ghost who haunted nightmares across continents until he walked away for Isaiah. Now that ghost stirred, restless and hungry. He powered up the laptop, its screen bathing his face in a blue glow, and cracked into the Birmingham PD database with a speed that would have shamed most hackers. Firewalls folded under his keystrokes, 15 years of Delta training making child's play of their security. Names flashed across the screen. Brett Dawson, 34, multiple brutality complaints buried under red tape. Nathan Holt, 42, linked to a string of questionable arrests in black neighborhoods. Malcolm's lips curled into a grim line as he downloaded their files, schedules, patrol routes, home addresses. He leaned back, the chair creaking under his 200 pounds of muscle, and stared at the ceiling where Isaiah slept above him. This wasn't just about today. He knew it was about every smirk, every slur, every time the system let men like them walk free. By 9, he stood outside the precinct, a squat grey building 3 miles from the park, its lights buzzing in the sticky night. He watched from a shadowed alley as Dawson and Holt strutted out their shift laughing over coffee cups, replaying their triumph with exaggerated gestures. "Did you see his face?" Dawson chuckled, mimicking Malcolm's growl. "All bark, no bite." Holt slurped his drink, nodding. "Should have cuffed him too, teach him who owns this city." They climbed into their cruiser, oblivious to the faint ping on its GPS, a tracker Malcolm had planted earlier with a flick of his wrist. He returned home, slipping inside as Isaiah stirred, mumbling in his sleep. Malcolm checked on him, the boys, breathing steadier now, though his brow furrowed with nightmares. He knelt beside him, brushing a thumb over Isaiah's cheek, the tenderness at odds with the steel in his veins. He'd built a life here, a shield against his past, but those cops shattered it in broad daylight. They thought he was powerless, just another black man to push around. They were wrong. He stood the decision hardening and returned to the basement, pulling the pistol from the cache. It fit his hand like a lost limb, cold steel warming to his touch. He loaded it with a soft click, the sound a vow to himself, to Isaiah, to the men who dared touch his son. By 11, he sat in the dark, the laptop flickering as he mapped their lives, their weaknesses, their sins. He'd warned them they'd regret it, and he meant it. The ghost was awake, and he was coming for them, step by silent step, a shadow they'd never see until it was too late. He could end it now, slip into their homes and leave them cold before dawn, but that was too quick, too clean. They needed to feel it, the weight of their mistake, the slow unraveling of their smug little world. He exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, Isaiah's cries echoing in his skull, a soundtrack to the fury driving him. This wasn't just revenge, he told himself. It was justice, raw and unfiltered, the kind the system denied men like him. It started tonight. He grabbed a duffel tossing in the vest and goggles, the laptop snapping shut. The night stretched on Birmingham's skyline, glittering beyond the window, a city oblivious to the war brewing in its veins. He stepped outside, the air heavy with humidity, and spotted their cruiser rolling past 2 blocks away, a taunt in their lazy patrol. He ducked into the shadows, his boots silent on the pavement, and followed their lights, his mind a steel trap, every detail locked in place. But as he trailed them a block from home, his burner buzzed, a grainy photo flashing on the screen, his barbershop engulfed in flames, orange tongues licking the windows, the sign "Carter's Cuts" melting into ash. A message followed, "Back off, boy," scrawled on a brick in the foreground. He froze, his pulse hammering as the cruiser's taillights vanished around a corner. The cops hadn't just crossed a line, they'd torched it, laughing as they went. He sprinted back the 3/4 mile to his shop, arriving as sirens wailed in the distance, too late to matter. The building was a blackened shell glass crunching under his boots, the stench of gasoline choking the air. Neighbors stood across the street whispering, but he didn't hear them. His eyes locked on the smoldering ruin of his life's work, a racial wound carved into the night. Malcolm Carter stood amidst the smoldering wreckage of his barbershop, the acrid stench of charred wood and gasoline searing his lungs as the Birmingham night pressed in heavy and humid. Flames still licked at the edges of the shattered windows, casting jagged shadows across the pavement where his life's work lay in ruins. The brick with its scrawled threat "Back off, boy" glinted in the flickering light, a racist scar etched into his world. His hands clenched into fists, knuckles whitening as the distant wail of sirens grew louder, too late to save anything that mattered. He turned away, his boots crunching glass, as he headed back to the house, his mind a storm of fury and calculation. Isaiah needed him now more than ever, and he wouldn't let those cops win. By midnight he'd slipped Isaiah out the back door, the boy's small frame shivering under a hoodie as they moved through the shadows of their neighborhood. Malcolm's sister Aisha waited 5 miles away in a cramped safe house, a 2-bedroom shotgun shack in a black enclave on Birmingham's west side. Her wiry build and sharp eyes met them at the door, her braids pulled tight against her scalp, a nurse's resilience in her stance. "You're late," she said, her voice low but firm as she ushered them inside, locking the deadbolt with a click. The place smelled of bleach and old coffee, its peeling wallpaper a testament to years of stubborn survival. Isaiah collapsed on a threadbare couch, his bruised cheek still swollen, his brown eyes darting to Malcolm. "They gonna come for us again, Dad?" Malcolm knelt beside him, brushing a hand over his son's hair, his touch gentle against the chaos brewing inside. "Not here, little man. We're safe with Aunt Aisha." The lie tasted bitter, but he forced a tight smile, watching Isaiah nod, exhaustion pulling the boy under. Aisha crossed her arms, her scrubs wrinkled from a long shift. "Those cops won't—" "Stop, Malcolm. I saw the fire on the news, already spinning it as vandalism, no mention of them." He stood, his 6'3" frame towering in the dim room, his jaw tight. "They won't stop me either." He set up in the kitchen, a rickety table, his battlefield, the laptop from his basement, glowing as he powered it on. Terence, his old Delta, Buddy rolled in at one, his hulking figure filling the doorway, a duffel of gear slung over his shoulder. His shaved head gleamed under the bulb, his scar snaking down his neck, a memento from Kabul. "Heard about the shop," he grunted, dropping the bag with a thud. "Time to hit back?" Malcolm nodded, his fingers flying over the keys as he breached. The Birmingham PD's database again. Hard and fast. The screen lit up with files Brett Dawson and Nathan Holt, their brutality records spilling out like venom, dozens of complaints buried by internal affairs, broken bones in black neighborhoods, kids roughed up for nothing, all swept under a racist rug. Terence leaned over, his breath sharp with mint gum. "Enough here to bury them." Malcolm's lips twitched a grim half-smile as he compressed the data into a zip file, uploading it to a dark web Dropbox he'd used in his covert days. He pinged a rogue journalist he'd met years back, a wiry white guy named Jake, who'd exposed a city council scam and lived for the next big scoop. By 2, the email was out, subject line "Birmingham PD's dirty secret." Malcolm leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight as Terence cracked his knuckles. "Think it'll stick?" Malcolm's eyes narrowed. "It'll light a fire." By 8, the story broke Jake's byline, screaming across local news sites, grainy photos of Dawson and Holt, paired with leaked reports of their violence. Hashtags like "Justice for Isaiah" trended on Twitter, protest chants echoing from downtown, as crowds swelled outside the precinct, a grey fortress buzzing with nervous cops. Malcolm watched from the safe house TV, Aisha brewing coffee as Isaiah stirred, awake, rubbing sleep from his eyes. The anchor, a stiff blonde in a red blazer, stumbled over the words. "Officers Brett Dawson and Nathan Holt suspended pending investigation after shocking evidence of systemic abuse." Malcolm's chest loosened, a rare flicker of hope warming his bones as Isaiah shuffled over, wrapping thin arms around his waist. "We did it, Dad." He hugged the boy back, his deep voice steady. "Yeah, little man, we got him." Aisha nodded from the kitchen, her faith in him unshaken. "Maybe we can breathe now." By noon, he drove to juvenile intake, a squat brick building, 10 miles east. where they'd stashed Isaiah after the park beating. The suspension had rattled the system enough to cut through red tape, and he signed the release papers, his signature sharp against the page. Isaiah ran to him in the lobby, his sneakers scuffing the tile tears brimming as they embraced. Malcolm lifted him his son's weight a lifeline, his bruised face a map of cruelty he'd erase. They were back together, a win carved from the chaos. They returned to the safe house by one, the sun beating down on the cracked streets, as Malcolm locked the door behind them. Aisha cooked lunch collards and cornbread, the smell grounding them in something normal. He sat with Isaiah at the table, the boy scarfing food like he hadn't eaten in days, his laughter a fragile spark. Malcolm allowed himself a moment to believe they'd turned a corner, the cops on their heels, the city watching. He'd outsmarted them, used their own dirt to choke them, thought it might slow the bleeding. The TV droned in the background protest, footage looping a sea of signs demanding accountability. But Birmingham's shadows didn't rest. At 11, the night shattered as floodlights pierced the safe house windows, red and blue strobes painting the walls in frantic pulses. A bullhorn blared outside. Malcolm Carter, Birmingham PD, come out, hands up. His stomach dropped, his hand snapping to the pistol at his hip, as Isaiah jolted awake on the couch, his small body curling into a ball. "Dad?" Aisha lunged to the window, peering through the blinds, her voice sharp. "SWAT, dozen of 'em." Malcolm moved fast, shoving Isaiah toward the back room. "Crawl space now, little man." The boy obeyed, scrambling under the floorboards, his sneakers vanishing into the dark as Malcolm grabbed his vest from the duffel. The front door exploded inward, wood splintering as a SWAT team stormed in, black-clad figures with rifles raised, shouting orders that blurred into chaos. "Drug tip," the lead officer barked, a wiry man with a buzz cut shoving a warrant in Malcolm's face, his sneer a twisted scar. "You're under arrest." Aisha charged forward, her braids swinging. "Drugs? This is my house, you lying pigs." A cop slammed her against the wall, pinning her arms as she cursed them, her voice raw with fury. Malcolm stood, hands visible, his pulse a war drum in his chest. "Let her go, she's got nothing to do with this." The wiry cop laughed, ripping Aisha's wrists into cuffs, yanking her toward the door as she kicked at his shins. They tore through, the shack flipping the couch, smashing the TV, ripping drawers from their frames. A stocky cop with a shaved head pulled a baggie of white powder from his own vest, planting it on the kitchen counter with a smirk, logging it loud enough for the neighbors peeking through cracked blinds to hear. "Looks like we got a dealer here." Aisha screamed, her voice cracking. "That's a lie, you framed us." A rifle butt cracked her shoulder, silencing her as she gasped, collapsing to her knees, blood trickling down her scrubs. Malcolm lunged, but two barrels jammed into his chest, freezing him, his breath ragged as they cuffed his wrists, the metal biting deep. They hauled Aisha outside the night air, cool against her skin, as floodlights blinded them, her shouts swallowed by the chaos. Malcolm slipped free in the scuffle, his Delta instincts kicking in, ducking behind the couch as a cop's back turned. He bolted to the back window, leaping through the glass shards, slicing his palms as he hit the dirt, rolling into the shadows of an alley 2 houses down. His lungs burned, his vest heavy on his chest, as he crouched low, watching the SWAT van lurch away with Aisha, her silhouette slumped in the rear. Isaiah's crawl space stayed silent, a small mercy in the storm. He sank against the alley wall, his hands bleeding, his mind racing. He'd exposed Dawson, and Holt thought the suspension would clip their wings, give Isaiah a chance to heal. Instead, the system doubled down, a fake drug tip, a planted baggie, a SWAT raid to bury them. Racism wasn't just in the cops. It was the precinct's heartbeat, a machine that chewed up black families and spat out lies. Aisha's screams echoed in his skull, a sound he couldn't unhear, fueling a fire hotter than vengeance. He stood, his shadow stretching across the gravel, the ghost fully awake now, a predator with a purpose. They thought they'd broken him, but this was just the start. Drop a comment with number 1 if you think Malcolm's fight back against these corrupt cops is worth every risk, or number 2 if you reckon the system's too rigged for him to win. Press like if Aisha's courage in the face of brutality hits you hard, and subscribe because tomorrow's chapter ramps up the stakes in ways you won't see coming. Can Malcolm claw his way out of this racist trap, or will the next blow crush them all? Stick around to find out what twists fate has in store. Malcolm Carter crouched in the alley's damp shadows, his palms stinging from glass cuts. as the SWAT van's taillights faded into Birmingham's humid night. Aisha's screams still rang in his ears, a jagged wound that fueled the fire in his chest. The safe house raid had torn his sister away, framed her with planted drugs, and left Isaiah trembling in a crawlspace beneath the floorboards. His breath came in short bursts, his tactical vest heavy against his ribs, as he slipped through backyards, avoiding streetlights, his boots silent on the grass. He needed a plan, needed to know where they'd taken her. The precinct wouldn't hold. Her long not with a setup this blatant they'd bury her deeper, somewhere off the books. By one, he reached a payphone 3 blocks west, its plastic cracked and sticky with grime. He dialed Terence, his voice low and clipped. "They got Aisha County Jail, I think. Need you now." Terence's gruff reply came fast. "On it, 10 minutes." Malcolm hung up, wiping the receiver with his sleeve, his Delta instincts humming. As he mapped the jail's layout in his mind, a squat concrete box 8 miles east, surrounded by chain link and floodlights. He moved to a rusted pickup he'd hot-wired earlier, its engine coughing to life as he rolled toward the meetup. A vacant lot near a shuttered steel mill, its smokestacks looming like ghosts against the moonless sky. Terence arrived at 1:15, his black SUV crunching gravel as he stepped out, duffel in hand, his scar stark under the dim street lamp. "County's got her booked for possession," he said, tossing Malcolm a silenced pistol, its weight a cold comfort in his grip. "Bullshit charge they're moving her tonight." Malcolm nodded, strapping on night vision goggles from the bag, their green tint sharpening the dark. "We hit 'em before they do." They drove east, the pickup's headlights off, navigating by memory through Birmingham's industrial sprawl, the air thick with the tang of rust and oil. The jail loomed ahead, its perimeter quiet, but for the hum of generators and the occasional bark of a guard dog, they parked a quarter-mile out, cutting through a drainage ditch knee-deep in stagnant water, its stench clinging to their clothes. Malcolm scaled the outer fence first, his gloved hands gripping the links as he dropped silently on the other side, Terence following with a soft thud. The guard towers stood empty budget cuts, leaving blind spots Malcolm had counted on. They moved low, skirting the floodlit yard to a side entrance. A steel door rusted at the hinges. He picked the lock with a tension wrench, the click barely audible, as they slipped inside, the air shifting to mildew and sweat. The jail's corridors stretched narrow and dim, lit by flickering bulbs that buzzed like dying flies. Malcolm led pistol, raised his goggles, painting the guards in eerie green, 2 stationed at a checkpoint 20 feet ahead, chatting over stale coffee. He signaled Terence with a flick of his wrist, and they struck twin shadows in motion. Malcolm's silenced shot punched through the first guard's throat, blood spraying the wall as Terence snapped the second's neck with a twist, the body crumpling before a yelp could escape. They dragged the corpses into a closet, their boots scraping softly on the tile, and pressed deeper into the maze. Aisha's cell sat at the end of B block, a 6x8 cage with bars rusted brown. She slumped on the cot, her braids tangled, her shoulder swollen purple from the SWAT-hit blood crusting her scrubs. Her eyes snapped up as Malcolm approached, relief flashing across her sharp features. "Took you long enough," she rasped, standing, with a wince. He jimmied the lock with a shiv from his boot, the metal groaning as it gave way. She stumbled out, leaning on him, her breath ragged. "They beat me, said I'd rot here." Malcolm's jaw tightened, his arm steadying her. "Not today." They backtracked fast, Terence covering their rear, his pistol sweeping the hall as alarms. Stayed silent, their entry still undetected. They hit the yard at 2:30, ducking behind a dumpster, as a patrol truck rolled past, its headlights slicing the dark. Malcolm boosted Aisha over the fence, her grunts muffled by clenched teeth, then followed with Terence scaling last. They sprinted to the pickup, piling in, as the engine sputtered, then roared, peeling out onto a back road, dust billowing behind them. Aisha slumped in the back seat, her voice hoarse. "Isaiah, okay?" Malcolm nodded, gripping the wheel. "Crawl space. Saved him." They ditched the truck at a junkyard 5 miles south, swapping it for Terence's SUV, its tinted windows a shield, as they drove to a new hideout, a crumbling motel off Highway 20. Malcolm set Aisha on a lumpy bed, its springs creaking as he bandaged her shoulder with a kit from the duffel, her skin hot under his fingers. She'd lived battered, but unbroken, a survivor like him. He stepped outside the neon sign flickering overhead and powered up his laptop, hacking into precinct logs again. He planted evidence, a forged email chain tying the drug raid to Vernon Shaw, a corrupt captain, with a rap sheet of buried complaints. The file hit Jake's inbox at 3 subject line, Shaw's dirty game. By dawn, the story broke Shaw's smug mugshot. Plastered across news feeds, his suspension announced by 8 as protests, swelled downtown chants of "lock him up" bouncing off skyscrapers. Malcolm watched from the motel TV Aisha sipping water beside him, her faith in him a quiet anchor. He'd freed her outsmarted. The jail thought Shaw's fall would cripple their chain of command. Isaiah stayed hidden at the safe house, a neighbor guarding him with a shotgun, until Malcolm could get back. They'd slip away, start over, he believed it. As he packed the gear, the motel's stale air tasting like freedom. He drove west at 10, the sun climbing high as he pulled into the safe house alley, the shack's windows dark but intact. He stepped, inside calling softly, "Isaiah, little man, it's me." The neighbor, a grizzled woman named Ruth, nodded from the kitchen, her shotgun propped nearby. "He's fine, slept through it all." Malcolm exhaled relief washing over him as he moved to the crawl space, lifting the trapdoor. Isaiah climbed out, his hoodie smeared with dust, his brown eyes lighting up. "Dad, you got Aunt Aisha?" Malcolm pulled him close, his son's warmth a lifeline. "Yeah, we're good now." They sat together on the couch, Ruth brewing tea, as the TV looped protest footage. Shaw's suspension, a crack in the precinct's armor. Malcolm allowed himself a breath, thinking they'd dodged the worst, the system reeling the cops on their heels. He'd go back for Aisha tonight, move them all north. Maybe Montgomery, where he had cousins who'd hide them. The plan solidified, his mind easing as Isaiah leaned against him. The boys breathing steady, a rare calm in the storm. But at noon the air split with a raw scream, tires screeching outside as a black van skidded into the alley. Malcolm bolted to the window, peering through the blinds, his pulse hammering, as 4 iron sentinels, Birmingham's local militia, spilled out their camo vests, stained with sweat rifles slung over shoulders. Ruth grabbed her shotgun, but a burst of gunfire shredded the door-splintering wood as they stormed in. Malcolm shoved Isaiah behind the couch, drawing his pistol, but they were too fast. A beefy thug with a neck tattoo snatched Isaiah by the arm, dragging him kicking and screaming toward the van. His cries slicing the air. Malcolm fired 2 shots, dropping 1 sentinel with a hole in his chest, blood pooling on the oak floor, but a rifle butt cracked his skull, stars exploding in his vision as he hit the ground. Ruth swung her shotgun, blasting a second thug's leg, his howl echoing, but the others pinned her, slamming her face into the wall until she crumpled. The tattooed leader hauled Isaiah outside the boys' sneakers, scraping gravel as the van's side door slammed shut. Malcolm staggered up, blood trickling down his temple, reaching for the window as tires squealed, the van peeling away into the noon heat. He stumbled to the kitchen, finding Ruth groaning, her nose smashed, blood dripping onto her shirt. She rasped, clutching her side. "Took him, said you'd come." Malcolm's hands shook as he grabbed his burner, a video file buzzing in from an unknown number. He opened it, his breath catching as Isaiah's face filled the screen, tear-streaked and bruised, a gag biting into his mouth. The tattooed sentinel loomed behind a rifle barrel pressed to the boy's temple. "Surrender, Carter, or he's dead," he growled, his voice thick with hate. The camera panned to a decrepit warehouse, Birmingham's outskirts flashing on a sign, then cut to black. Malcolm's knees buckled, the phone clattering to the table as Ruth coughed, blood speckling her chin. He'd broken Aisha, outplanted Shaw's. Downfall thought they'd slip free. Instead, the sentinels struck a racist claw, ripping Isaiah away, demanding his life for his sons. He stood, his shadow stretching across the room, the ghost roaring awake. Shaw wasn't done off the leash. He'd hired these animals to break him. The precinct spun lies on TV, already calling the safe house shootout. A drug bust gone wrong, Malcolm the dealer. He grabbed his vest and pistol, his mind a steel trap locking on the warehouse. They thought they'd won, but he'd tear through hell to prove them wrong. Malcolm Carter stood in the safe house kitchen, his boots scuffing the blood-smeared oak floor, as Ruth's ragged breaths filled the silence. The Iron Sentinel's van had vanished into Birmingham's noon heat, taking Isaiah, his 12-year-old son, with it, a racist blade twisted into his gut. The video looped in his mind, Isaiah's tear-streaked face, The gag biting his mouth, the tattooed thug's rifle at his temple, a demand for surrender or death. His temple throbbed blood, crusting from the rifle butt, below his hands trembling as he gripped the burner phone. Ruth coughed, clutching her broken nose, her voice a wet rasp. "They said warehouse outskirts, you going?" Malcolm's deep brown eyes hardened, his 6'3" frame rigid with fury. "They don't get to win." He patched Ruth's face with a towel from the sink, her blood soaking the faded cotton as she winced, her grey hair matted with sweat. "Get to a clinic," he said, shoving his pistol into its holster, the vest snapping tight across his chest. She nodded, staggering to her feet, her shotgun useless now against the militia's numbers. Malcolm grabbed the duffel from under the table, slinging it over his shoulder, its weight a promise of violence as he stepped into the alley. The burner buzzed again, the signal faint but alive, a ping from Isaiah's dropped phone tracing northwest to Shelby County, 30 miles out, a rural sprawl of pine thickets and abandoned farms. He hot-wired a dented sedan from a neighbor's driveway, its engine growling as he peeled onto Highway 78, the sun glaring off the hood, sweat beading down his neck. The drive stretched endless, his mind a steel trap plotting entry points, kill zones, escape routes, his Delta training flooding back like a tidal wave. He'd freed Aisha from the county jail, thought Shaw's suspension bought them time, but the Sentinel's strike flipped it, a racist counterpunch, orchestrated by Vernon Shaw from his precinct exile. The warehouse loomed in his skull, a decrepit shell, where his son's life hung by a thread. By 2, he reached Shelby County, cutting the engine. A mile from the ping source, a dirt road snaking through dense woods to a militia compound. He moved on foot, the duffel slung low, his boots sinking into the soft earth pine needles, crunching under his weight. The compound emerged through the trees, a sprawl of tin-roofed shacks, ringed by razor-wire floodlights dormant in the daylight. 10 sentinels patrolled, their camo vests, patched with Confederate flags, rifles slung loose, their laughter grating as they smoked hand-rolled cigarettes. Malcolm crouched behind a fallen log, his night vision goggles useless now, swapped for binoculars that sharpened their faces, tattooed necks, sunburned arms, a pack of wolves guarding his cub. He circled west, flanking the perimeter where a rusted gate sagged on its hinges, a blind spot in their lazy watch. His heart hammered, Isaiah's cries echoing in his skull as he slipped through the gap, his pistol drawn its silencer, a whisper of death. The first guard, a wiry man with a missing tooth, stood 20 feet off, pissing against a tree, oblivious, as Malcolm closed the gap. A muted shot punched through his skull, blood splattering the bark as he crumpled Malcolm, dragging him into the brush, his boots silent on the damp ground. He moved like smoke, a ghost in broad daylight, taking the second, a beefy thug with a buzz. Cut with a knife to the throat, his gurgle swallowed by the wind. The main shack loomed ahead, its tin walls dented and peeling, a faint whimper leaking through the cracks. Malcolm's pulse spiked, Isaiah alive, pulling him closer, as he breached the side door, pistol raised. Inside, 5 sentinels sprawled around a card table, beer cans littering the floor, their rifles propped against chairs. Isaiah sat bound in the corner, his wrists zip-tied to a pipe, his brown eyes wide with terror, blood trickling from a split lip. The tattooed leader from the video paced nearby, a shotgun in his grip, barking slurs at the boy. "Your daddy's too scared to show how little rat." Malcolm struck a one-man army, unleashed his first shot, dropping a card player through the eye blood, spraying the table as the others scrambled. He rolled behind a crate, firing twice more, 2 more collapsing with holes in their chests, their screams cut short. The tattooed thug spun, shotgun blasting, the wall plaster raining, as Malcolm dove low, his knife arcing into the man's thigh, tearing muscle. The thug howled, crashing down, shotgun skittering, as Malcolm pinned him, snapping his neck with a twist, the crack sharp in the stale air. The last sentinel lunged, rifle raised, but Malcolm's pistol barked a bullet, blooming in his forehead, dropping him in a heap. He cut Isaiah free, the boy sobbing, as the zip ties fell, his small arms wrapping tight around Malcolm's neck. "Dad, I knew you'd come." He choked, blood smearing Malcolm's vest, as he lifted him, his son's weight, a lifeline in the chaos. "Always, little man." He planted evidence, a burner phone loaded with texts linking Shaw to the sentinels, shoving it into the tattooed thug's pocket, a breadcrumb for the law. They slipped out the back as sirens wailed faint in the distance, too slow to catch the ghost. He carried Isaiah through the woods, the boy's breath ragged but steady, his 12 pounds of courage grounding. Malcolm's rage. By 4 they hit a motel off Highway 20. Its neon sign buzzing vacancy, the clerk a bored teen who took cash, no questions. Malcolm set Isaiah on the bed, its quilt patched and musty, checking his lip with a wet cloth, the blood clotting under gentle pressure. "You're tough, kid," he said, forcing a smile as Isaiah nodded, his eyes heavy. Malcolm powered up the laptop, uploading the planted evidence to Jake's Dropbox subject line, "Shaw's militia ties." He leaned back the chair, groaning under his 200 pounds, thinking they'd turned the Tide Shaw's arrest a hammer to drop. By 6, the story broke grainy footage of the compound, paired with the texts Shaw's face on every screen as state police cuffed him outside his home, his barrel-chested, frame slumping in defeat. Malcolm watched from the motel TV, Isaiah dozing beside him, his small chest rising steady, a win, carved from blood and grit. He'd stormed the compound, killed 10 men, freed his son, thought they'd bought time to vanish north, maybe Montgomery, where cousins waited. The precinct reeled the Sentinels, link a noose around Shaw's neck. Malcolm believing they'd slip free, start over, but at 8, the air shifted, a news ticker crawling across the screen, FBI labels, Birmingham rescue domestic terrorism suspect. Malcolm Carter, a rogue Delta Force killer. His stomach dropped, his hand snapping to the pistol as the anchor, a slick man in a grey suit, read the leak. Carter's military past uncovered 20 confirmed kills in Iraq, Somalia, a trained assassin. Loose in Alabama. Malcolm's Delta file flashed on screen, classified missions twisted into a smear. A black man branded a monster. He stood pacing the motel's stained carpet, his shadow stretching as Isaiah stirred. "Dad, what's that mean?" He knelt, brushing Isaiah's hair, his voice steady despite the storm. "Means their scared little man will be okay." But the lie burned his throat as sirens wailed, distant, but closing Birmingham streets alive with vigilante trucks, Confederate flags flapping in the dusk. The FBI leak wasn't random. Shaw's allies struck back, painting Malcolm a terrorist, sparking a nationwide manhunt. He grabbed the duffel, shoving gear inside, his mind racing as headlights slashed the curtains. Vigilantes swarmed the city, hunting a black father and son, their racism a wildfire lit by a system that wouldn't bend. He scooped Isaiah up, the boy's sneakers, dangling as they slipped out the back, the motel's gravel lot crunching underfoot. A pickup roared past 2 blocks away, its bed packed with armed men shouting slurs, their rifles gleaming in the twilight. Malcolm ducked into an alley, his vest tight, his pistol ready, as Isaiah clung to him, trembling. He'd killed the Sentinels. Saved his son, thought Shaw's arrest ended it. Instead, the FBI flipped the script, a racist lie, turning his victory to ash. Vigilante boots stomped closer, their chance a death knell in the humid air. Malcolm's ghost alive, but hunted a warrior cornered by a city that hated him. Drop a comment with number 1 if you think Malcolm's rescue proves he's a hero worth rooting for, or number 2 if you believe the FBI's smear will bury him too deep to fight back. Press like if Isaiah's bravery through this nightmare stirs your soul, and subscribe, because tomorrow's chapter unleashes chaos you won't predict. Will Malcolm outrun a nation turned against him, or has Shaw's final play sealed their fate? Stay locked in to see how this war explodes next. Malcolm Carter sprinted through the alley, his boots splashing in puddles of stagnant water. As Isaiah clung to his back, the boy's thin arms tight around his neck. Birmingham's dusk thickened with humidity, the air alive with the rumble of vigilante. Trucks, their Confederate flags snapping in the wind 2 blocks away. The FBI's leak had branded him a domestic terrorist, his Delta past twisted into a racist lie plastered on every screen from Alabama to California. Sweat stung his eyes, his tactical vest chafing his ribs as he ducked behind a dumpster, its rusted steel cold against his palm. Isaiah's breath hitched, his 12-year-old voice a whisper. "They're everywhere, Dad." Malcolm adjusted the boy's weight, his 6'3" frame steady, despite the ache in his legs from the motel sprint. "Stay quiet, little man, we're getting out." He scanned the alley's end, spotting a drainage grate half hidden by weeds, a narrow escape from the vigilante's headlights slashing the streets. He pried it open with his knife, the metal groaning as he lowered Isaiah into the tunnel, its damp walls slick with moss. He followed, squeezing through the gap, his shoulders scraping concrete as he pulled the grate shut. the clang muffled by the roar of engines above. They crawled 50 feet through the dark, the tunnel's stench of rot and sewage choking their lungs, until it spilled into a creek bed, its banks overgrown with kudzu. Malcolm lifted Isaiah onto dry ground. The boy's sneakers soaked his brown eyes wide but trusting. They moved north, skirting the city's edge through abandoned lots and railroad, tracks the skyline fading as vigilante shouts grew distant. He'd killed the sentinels freed. Isaiah thought Shaw's arrest bought them freedom, but the FBI's smear flipped it a nationwide manhunt sparked by a system that painted black resilience as terror. By 9, they reached a church 10 miles out, a clapboard sanctuary on a quiet hill. Its steeple weathered but standing tall in the moonlight. Reverend Monroe met them at the back door, his white beard stark against his dark skin, his eyes sharp with understanding as he ushered them inside. "Heard the news, Malcolm? You're a ghost now," he said, his voice gravelly locking the door, with a heavy bolt. The pews smelled of wax and old hymnals, their wood worn smooth by decades of prayer. Isaiah sank onto one, his hoodie damp, his split lips scabbing over as Malcolm set the duffel down. "Need a minute, Reverend? We'll move by dawn." Monroe nodded, pouring water from a pitcher, his hands steady despite his 70 years. "You're safe here, son, long as I breathe." Malcolm drank deep, the coolness easing his parched throat. As he powered up the laptop, its glow cutting the dim, he hacked into FBI servers, a backdoor he'd planted in his Delta days, pulling emails between Vernon Shaw and Agent Miles, a slick bureaucrat who'd leaked his file. The chain laid it bare. Miles framed the compound rescue as terrorism to shield Shaw's militia ties, burying complaints from black families for kickbacks. Malcolm's fingers flew, compressing the data into a file he sent to Jake, subject line "FBI's racist cover-up." By 10, the story broke, Jake's byline screaming across news sites, grainy screenshots of the emails paired with Miles's smug headshot. Protests flared again downtown Birmingham streets, a sea of fury, as hashtags like "Expose the Feds" trended nationwide. Malcolm watched from the church TV, Monroe brewing tea, as Isaiah dozed on the pew, his small frame curled tight. The anchor, a jittery man in a blue tie, stammered through the update. Agent Miles fired amid explosive leaks, tying him to Birmingham PD corruption. Malcolm's chest loosened, a flicker of triumph warming his bones as Monroe clapped his shoulder. "You hit 'em hard, son. Maybe they'll back off." He sat with Isaiah, brushing the boy's hair, his deep voice soft. "We're turning it around, little man." The Reverend hummed a hymn, his faith a quiet shield, as the TV looped footage of Miles ducking reporters, his career ash. Malcolm allowed himself a breath, thinking they'd found sanctuary, the system cracking under its own weight. He'd uncovered a lead on Shaw's operations too, a stash house in Ensley, 5 miles west, where the captain hoarded bribe cash and militia gear. Mapped a sting on the laptop, plotting to raid it at midnight, end Shaw for good slip north with Isaiah by morning. The church grew still, crickets chirping outside, as Malcolm checked his pistol, its silencer gleaming in the candlelight. He'd broken Shaw's spine with the Sentinel's fall, thought the FBI leak would bury him deeper. Monroe's sanctuary felt like a fortress, the sting a final blow to vanish clean. He stood stretching his legs, the plan solidifying, as Isaiah's breathing steadied, a rare calm settling over them. They'd rest an hour, then move. He'd end this nightmare tonight. But at 11 the air trembled, a low hum swelling into a roar as glass shattered the church's stained windows, exploding inward flames blooming across the pews. Malcolm dove, shielding. Isaiah, as a bomb's blast, rocked the sanctuary wood, splintering heat searing his back. Screams erupted, Monroe's voice a ragged cry as he stumbled from the altar, his beard singed, his arm bleeding from shrapnel. Isaiah coughed, eyes streaming as Malcolm dragged him behind the pulpit, its oak charred, but standing, the boy's small hands clutching his vest. "Dad, what's that?" Malcolm's ears rang, his pistol drawn as smoke choked the air-orange tongues, licking the walls, a Molotov cocktail's jagged remnants glinting on the floor. He spotted Ethan Crowley through the haze, a hulking ex-Special Forces mercenary in black tactical gear, his scarred face twisted with glee, tossing a second bomb that blasted the choir loft into ash. Shaw, off the leash, had hired a sadist to finish. Them Crowley's reputation, a trail of burned villages from Somalia to Syria. Malcolm fired 2 shots, the bullets punching Crowley's vest sparking, as the mercenary ducked, laughing a guttural taunt. Price says, "Hello, Carter, you're done." Monroe staggered forward, swinging a candlestick at Crowley's skull, the metal clanging off his helmet. But the mercenary spun pistol, cracking the Reverend's temple, dropping him in a heap, blood pooling beneath his white hair. Malcolm roared, lunging with Isaiah in his arms, but Crowley vanished into the smoke, the flames roaring higher, cutting their path. He kicked through a side door, dragging Isaiah outside the night air, cool against their singed skin, as the church burned a beacon in the dark. Isaiah's sneakers scraped gravel, his voice cracking. "He's dead, Dad. Reverend's dead." Malcolm set him down, checking for burns. His own hands blistered as sirens wailed, closing in red and blue lights slashing the hill. Cops swarmed, not rescuers but hunters. Rifles raised as Officer Hicks, a squat man with a patchy beard, barked orders, his smirk a twisted scar. "Malcolm Carter, you're under arrest, church bombing terrorism." Malcolm froze, pistol still in hand. As Crowley's shadow faded into the trees, the mercenary gone, leaving him to take the fall. Hicks stepped closer, notepad out, scribbling lies. "Planted the bomb, killed the preacher, witnesses saw you." Isaiah sobbed, clinging to Malcolm's leg, his small frame trembling as a cop wrenched him away, shoving him toward a cruiser. "He didn't do it, he saved me," the boy screamed. But Hicks laughed, cuffing Malcolm's wrists, the metal biting deep. They dragged him to a van, Isaiah's cries echoing as cops spun the scene on live TV, a news chopper circling above its feed, hitting screens nationwide. "Birmingham church bombed, Delta vet Malcolm Carter apprehended at the scene," the anchor droned, framing him a terrorist in seconds. Malcolm sat in the van, his head pounding, blood trickling down his neck, as Hicks slammed the door, his squat frame silhouetted against the burning church. "Should have stayed down, boy," he sneered, the engine roaring as they pulled away, leaving Isaiah with medics who muttered slurs under their breath. Troublemaker kid, their hands rough on his bruised arms. Malcolm's vision blurred, his son's voice a ghost in his skull, as the precinct loomed ahead, a grey fortress swallowing him whole. He'd exposed Miles, thought the church would shield them, but Crowley's bomb flipped it, a racist trap snapping shut. The cell waited cold and buzzing, his wrists raw as they shoved him inside, Hicks's smirk a mirror of Shaw's hate. He'd freed Isaiah, broken the sentinels, thought the sting would end it, but Shaw laughed from the shadows, hiring Crowley to burn his world to ash. The cops twisted it, pinning the blast on him, a black man branded a killer on live TV. Racism wasn't just in the attack, it was the aftermath, the system snatching victory from his hands. He sank to the concrete bench, his vest heavy, his mind racing, a ghost snared but alive, plotting the next move they'd never see coming. Malcolm Carter slumped against the precinct cell's concrete bench. His wrists chafed raw from the cuffs biting into his skin, the buzz of fluorescent lights drilling into his skull. Birmingham's night pressed in, cold and heavy, the mildew stench. Thick as Isaiah's cries echoed in his mind, torn from his arms by cops after Ethan Crowley's church bombing. Reverend Monroe's blood stained his memory, the old man's crumpled body, a sacrifice to Shaw's racist wrath. His tactical vest hung heavy, blistered hands throbbing from the blast as he stared at the bars, a ghost caged but stirring. The TV blared through the hall, Hicks's voice crowing to reporters. Malcolm Carter, church bomber, caught red-handed, a lie, spinning live across Alabama. His head pounded, blood crusting his neck from the firefight, but his mind stayed sharp, a steel trap, forging a way out. He'd exposed Agent Miles, thought the church would shield them, but Crowley's bomb flipped it, pinning him for murder, while Isaiah vanished into the system's claws. The precinct hummed with lazy chatter guards slouched over coffee, their snores. A dull rhythm as Malcolm gripped a shiv he'd palmed from a broken mop, its jagged edge a promise in the dark. At midnight, a shadow moved Terence, his hulking Delta buddy slipping past the desk, a bribed guard, turning blind eyes for a wad of cash. "Black site south side," Terence whispered, shoving a burner through the bars, his scar stark under the dim glow. "They've got Isaiah moving him tonight." Malcolm nodded, snagging the phone, his fingers steady, as he hacked precinct feeds, a back door he'd planted days ago. The screen lit up grainy footage of a squat bunker, 10 miles out, its razor wire glinting under floodlights. Isaiah's small frame dragged inside by 2 cops, their faces blurred, but their slurs clear. Nigger brat a soundtrack to their hate. Malcolm's jaw tightened, his vest snapping tight as he stood. We hit it now. Terence picked the lock with a wire that clicked soft, as a whisper guards oblivious down the hall. As Malcolm slipped out, retrieving his gear from a stash, Terence had smuggled vest pistol goggles fitting like skin. They hot-wired a cruiser in the lot, its engine purring as they peeled South Birmingham's sprawl, a blur of sodium lights and crumbling brick. The black site loomed by one, a concrete tomb in an industrial wasteland, its guards patrolling with rifles slung chatter laced with venom about the black terrorist they'd caged. Malcolm parked a quarter-mile out, cutting through a ditch, its mud sucking at their boots as they flanked the perimeter. He signaled Terence with a nod, moving silent as death, his goggles painting the night green, two guards at the gate joking over cigarettes, their backs turned. Malcolm struck a shadow in motion, his silence shot punching one's throat, blood misting the air as Terence snapped the other's neck with a twist, dropping him before a grunt escaped. They dragged the bodies behind a crate, boots whispering on gravel, and breached the side door, its lock yielding to Malcolm's shiv. Inside, the bunker stretched cold and sterile, lit by buzzing strips, its steel stairs echoing as they descended. Pistol and rifle raised a lethal duo reborn. Isaiah's cell sat at the bottom, a 6-foot box with bars rusted black, his small frame. Curled on a mat, wrists zip-tied, his split lip oozing fresh blood. Two other black teens huddled nearby, snatched off streets, their eyes hollow with fear, as a guard paced barking slurs. Malcolm's pulse spiked, his son alive, pulling him closer. As he fired twice, dropping the guard with holes in his chest and skull blood pooling on the tile, Terence swept in, cutting the teens free, their gasp sharp. As Malcolm ripped Isaiah's ties, the boy sobbing into his vest. "Dad, they hit me, said you're dead." Malcolm lifted him, his 12 pounds a lifeline in the dark. "Not yet, little man." He hacked the bunker's cams, live streaming the rescue to the dark web, grainy footage of Isaiah's bruises and the teens' terror hitting servers, nationwide tagged Birmingham black site exposed. Alarms screamed, red lights flashing as he led them up the stairs, pistol barking at guards who stumbled into their path, 3 falling in sprays of red, their rifles useless. They burst outside, the night air sharp as sirens wailed, cops too late to stop the ghost. By 2, they hit a rural cabin 15 miles north, a weathered shack owned by an ex-Marine named Terrell, its pine walls bare but solid in the moonlight. Malcolm set Isaiah on a cot, its springs creaking, checking his lip with a cloth from a medkit, the blood clotting under gentle pressure. The teens, Jalen and Micah, collapsed nearby, their skinny frames trembling, as Tyrell brewed coffee, his grizzled face nodding from the kitchen. "Safe here, Carter, you're a damn legend." Malcolm powered up the laptop, uploading the black site feed to Jake's subject line, Shaw's secret jail. By 3, the story broke, protests erupting nationwide. Grainy clips of Isaiah's rescue, paired with Shaw's rearrest outside his home state police, cuffing his barrel-chested frame as he cursed the cameras. Malcolm watched from the cabin TV, Isaiah dozing beside him, his small chest steady, a win, forged in blood and grit. He'd stormed the bunker, freed his son, thought they'd broken the system's spine. Terrell clapped his shoulder, his voice rough. "You've got 'em running, son, maybe they'll quit." Malcolm nodded, brushing Isaiah's hair, his deep voice soft. "We're turning it, little man." The cabin grew still, crickets chirping outside as Malcolm checked his pistol, its silencer gleaming in the lamplight. He'd killed Shaw's guards. Exposed the black site, thought they could vanish north by dawn, Montgomery's cousins, a lifeline. The precinct reeled, Shaw's rearrest, a noose tightening, Malcolm believing they'd slip free, start over. He stood stretching his legs, the plan solidifying as Isaiah's breathing steadied, a rare calm settling over them. They'd rest an hour, then move. He'd end this nightmare tonight. But at 4, the air split with a raw boom, the cabin's front wall exploding, inward flames blooming as a car bomb rocked the night. Malcolm dove, shielding Isaiah, debris raining, heat searing his blistered hands, as Tyrell's scream cut through the chaos, his grizzled form thrown clear, coffee pot shattering. Terence lunged from the back, his rifle raised, but the blast flipped him, crashing into the stove, his skull cracking on cast-iron blood, spraying as he crumpled dead. Isaiah coughed, eyes streaming as Malcolm dragged him from the wreckage, the boy's small hands clutching his vest. "Dad, he's gone." Malcolm's ears rang, his pistol drawn as smoke choked the air. Ethan Crowley's shadow loomed through the haze, the mercenary's scarred face grinning, tossing a grenade that blasted the cabin's roof into ash. Shaw, free on bail, had doubled, down hiring Crowley to burn them out a sadist's revenge for the black site. Malcolm fired the bullet, sparking Crowley's vest as the mercenary ducked, laughing a guttural taunt. "Shaw says you're dust, Carter." He vanished into the trees, the flames roaring higher, cutting their path, as Jalen and Micah scrambled out, coughing, their skinny frames singed but alive. Malcolm kicked through the back door, dragging Isaiah, outside the night air cool against their scorched skin, as the cabin burned a pyre for Terence. He carried Isaiah into the woods, the boy's sneakers dangling, his voice cracking. "Uncle T's dead, Daddy's dead." Malcolm set him down, checking for burns, his own hands raw, as sirens wailed, faint but closing. He grabbed the burner, uploading. The bomb's aftermath to Jake's subject line, Shaw's firebomb revenge. The feed hit as they fled, grainy clips of Terence's ruin, sparking outrage. But Shaw struck back harder, leaking doctored footage to newsrooms, Malcolm confessing to the bombing, his voice faked. "I burned it all a lie," fueling a new wave of lynch. Mobs. They hit the tree line, Isaiah trembling as vigilante trucks roared closer, their headlights slashing the dark chants of "kill the terrorist" ringing through the pines. Malcolm ducked low, his vest tight, his pistol ready, as Jalen and Micah followed, their breaths ragged. He'd freed Isaiah, exposed the black site, thought Shaw's rearrest ended it, but Crowley's bomb flipped it, a racist trap, killing Terence, turning victory to ash. The doctored footage spun live, Birmingham's airwaves alive with hate. Malcolm, a black man, branded a killer again. He led them deeper into the woods, his shadow stretching, a ghost alive, but bleeding, plotting a strike they'd never see coming. Drop. A comment with number 1, if you think Malcolm's relentless fight proves he's unbreakable, or number 2, if you reckon losing Terence will shatter his resolve. Press like if Isaiah's survival through this inferno fuels your hope, and subscribe, because tomorrow's chapter drops twists that'll leave you stunned. Can Malcolm claw back from this fiery betrayal, or will Shaw's next blow bury them in the shadows? Tune in to see how deep this war cuts. Malcolm Carter stumbled through the pine thickets of rural Alabama, his boots sinking into the damp earth, as Isaiah clung to his side, the boy's small hand trembling against his scorched vest. The cabin's fiery ruin glowed a mile back, Terence's, death a fresh wound bleeding into the night, as Ethan Crowley's car bomb echoed in his skull. Jalen and Micah trailed close, their skinny frames shivering in the cool air, their breaths ragged from the sprint. Vigilante trucks roared on the highway, 200 yards east, their headlights slashing, the dark chants of "kill the black terrorist" ringing through the trees. The doctored footage Shaw leaked branded Malcolm a confessor to the blaze, a racist lie fueling the lynch mobs hunting them. His blistered hands gripped the pistol, its silencer warm from the bunker fight, as he led them deeper into the woods, the canopy thick with shadows shielding them from the news chopper buzzing overhead. Isaiah's sneakers dragged, his split lip oozing anew, his brown eyes darting to Malcolm. "Dad, they're gonna find us." Malcolm knelt, brushing the boy's hair, his 6'3" frame a wall against the chaos. "Not tonight, little man, I've got you." The lie stung, but he forced it out, watching Jalen and Micah huddle nearby, their stolen hoodies, soaked with sweat and soot, a testament to their escape. He powered up the burner. Its screen cracked, but alive, hacking into Crowley's. Dark web comms, a thread he'd traced from the black site. The mercenary's orders spilled out, Vernon Shaw's voice barking through encrypted texts. "Burn them out, pin it on Carter. Make it stick." Malcolm's jaw tightened, his fingers flying as he forged a counter-leak, splicing Crowley's audio with precinct logs tying Shaw to the bombing. He sent it to Jake's subject line, Shaw's mercenary torch, hitting send as the chopper's rotor hum faded north, a fleeting respite in the storm. By 5, the story broke, grainy clips of Crowley's taunts, paired with Shaw's arrest photos, protests flaring nationwide as hashtags like Shawburns trended from Birmingham to Baltimore. Malcolm watched from a hollowed oak, the burners glow dim as Isaiah dozed against his leg. Jalen and Micah guarding the perimeter with sticks, their young faces hard with resolve. The anchor, a flustered woman in a green blazer, stumbled over. The update. Ethan Crowley arrested in Birmingham, linked to Captain Vernon Shaw's church and cabin attacks. Malcolm's chest eased, a flicker of hope warming his bones as he ruffled Isaiah's hair. "We're hitting back, little man." He moved them at dawn, slipping through the woods to a safe house Aisha had secured before the SWAT raid. A clapboard duplex in Ensley, 5 miles west, its windows boarded but intact. She met them at the door, out on bail, her braids frayed her shoulder. Still swollen purple from the beating, her sharp eyes blazing as she locked the bolt. "Heard about Terence?" she rasped, hugging Isaiah tight, her wiry frame trembling. "You're a damn fool, Malcolm, but you're alive." He set the duffel. Down its thud heavy on the pine floor, the air thick with dust and pine cleaner. For now, Isaiah sank onto a sagging couch. Its cushions patched his small frame, curling tight, as Aisha brewed tea, her hands steady despite the scars. "Crowley's locked up Shaw too. You think it's over?" she asked, pouring steaming cups the smell, grounding them in something fragile. Malcolm nodded, sipping the bitter brew, his pistol at his hip. Their reeling will lay low here. He'd freed Isaiah, exposed the black site, thought Crowley's arrest bought them time to vanish. North Montgomery's cousins a lifeline. The duplex felt like a bunker, the TV looping footage of Crowley's cuffs a win carved from ash and blood. He checked the burner at 8, the story holding Shaw and Crowley indicted for terrorism, the precinct's lies crumbling under public rage. Malcolm allowed himself a breath, thinking they'd dodged the noose, the system cracking, as Isaiah's breathing steadied beside him. He'd go north tonight, move them all under cover of dark start, over where the vigilantes couldn't reach. The plan solidified, his mind easing, as Aisha bandaged his hands, her touch a quiet anchor in the storm. But at 10 the air shifted, tires screeching outside as flames erupted through the duplex's front windows, Molotov cocktails, shattering glass, orange tongues licking the walls. Malcolm dove, shielding Isaiah as the blast rocked the shack, heat searing his raw hands, smoke choking their lungs. Aisha screamed, lunging for the back door, her braids singed as Crowley's voice roared from the yard. "Thought I'd rot Carter? Shaw's cash says otherwise." The mercenary, free on a technicality some judge Shaw owned, no doubt stood in black tactical gear, tossing a second bomb that blasted the kitchen into ash. Malcolm fired through the haze, 2 shots sparking Crowley's vest as the sadist ducked, laughing a guttural taunt. "You're bait, boy, she's mine." Sentinels swarmed from a van, their camo vests patched with hate, snatching Aisha before she hit the exit, dragging her kicking into the night, her cries slicing the air. Malcolm rolled Isaiah behind the couch, its frame charred, but standing pistol barking at the thugs, 3 falling with holes in their chests, blood pooling on the pine. Jalen and Micah scrambled up, swinging broken chairs at the rest, their skinny arms flailing. But the sentinels vanished with Aisha, tires squealing as they peeled away. Malcolm kicked through the smoldering front, the night air cool against his singed skin, dragging Isaiah from the wreckage, Jalen and Micah coughing beside him. The duplex burned a pyre for their refuge flames, licking the sky as sirens wailed, closing in red and blue lights slashing the street. Cops swarmed, rifles raised, Officer Hicks barking orders, his squat frame bristling with glee. "Malcolm Carter, you're under arrest, arson, terrorism." Malcolm froze, pistol still in hand, as Crowley's shadow faded into the chaos, leaving him to take the fall. Hicks stepped closer, notepad out, scribbling lies. "Torched your own sister's place, her witnesses." "Saw you?" Isaiah sobbed, clinging to Malcolm's leg, his small frame trembling as a cop wrenched him away, shoving him toward a cruiser. "He didn't do it, he saved us," the boy screamed, but Hicks laughed, cuffing Malcolm's wrists, the metal biting deep into his blistered flesh. They dragged him to a van. Jalen and Micah hauled off too, their cries swallowed by the chaos as cops spun the scene on live TV, a news truck rolling up its feed, hitting screens nationwide. Birmingham safe house fire, Delta vet Malcolm Carter apprehended at the scene, the anchor droned, framing him a terrorist in seconds. Malcolm sat in the van, his head throbbing, blood trickling down his neck, as Hicks slammed the door, his squat frame silhouetted against the burning duplex. "Keep digging, boy," he sneered, the engine roaring as they pulled away, leaving Isaiah with medics who muttered slurs under their breath. "Troublemaker kid," their hands rough on his bruised arms. Aisha's screams echoed in Malcolm's skull, a sound he couldn't unhear, as the precinct loomed ahead, a grey fortress swallowing him whole. He'd exposed Crowley, thought the arrest would hold, but Shaw's cash flipped it a racist trap, snatching his sister, torching their refuge. The cell waited cold and buzzing, his wrists raw, as they shoved him inside, Hicks's smirk a mirror of Shaw's hate. He'd freed Isaiah, broken the black site, thought they'd slip free, but Crowley struck back harder, taking Aisha, pinning the fire on him. The cops twisted it. Live, a black man branded an arsonist again, racism a noose tightening around his neck. Jalen and Micah vanished into the system too, their fates unknown as Malcolm sank to the bench, his vest heavy, his mind racing, a ghost snared, but alive, plotting a strike they'd never see coming. He'd burned Shaw's empire, thought it bought them peace, but the Sentinel's claws dug deeper, a war he couldn't outrun yet. Malcolm Carter sat shackled in the precinct van, his wrists raw from the cuffs cutting into his blistered flesh as the engine rumbled through Birmingham's humid night. The duplex fire glowed in his mind, Aisha's screams a jagged wound, as Ethan, Crowley's Sentinels, dragged her away, leaving him framed for arson on live TV. Isaiah's tear-streaked face lingered, the boy torn from his arms by cops, their slurs, troublemaker kid a racist echo as Hicks smirked through the window. The precinct loomed ahead, a grey fortress, its lights buzzing like flies over a corpse. But Malcolm's mind stayed sharp, a steel trap forging a breakout. He flexed his hands, the cuffs tight but not unbreakable, his Delta training kicking in as he scanned the van's interior. A rusted seam near the bench, a weak point. Hicks barked orders up front, his squat frame distracted as the driver swerved through traffic, the radio crackling with lies. Malcolm Carter, terrorist apprehended. He worked the shiv he'd fashioned from a broken chair leg in the safe house, its jagged edge hidden in his sleeve, a secret honed in shadows. At a stoplight he struck, twisting the metal into the seam, popping the cuff free, his wrist bleeding, but loose as Hicks turned too late. Malcolm lunged, slamming the shiv into the driver's, neck blood spraying the windshield as the van lurched, Hicks fumbling for his pistol, his patchy beard slick with sweat. Malcolm snapped his arm with a twist, the crack-sharp pistol clattering as he drove a fist into Hicks's jawbone, crunching under knuckles. The cop slumped, groaning. Malcolm kicking the door open, rolling onto the pavement as horns blared the van, crashing into a pole, steam hissing from its hood. He sprinted into an alley, his vest chafing his 6'3" frame, a shadow in the dark, his breath ragged but steady. By 11, he tracked Aisha to a Patriot compound in the Georgia mountains, 80 miles north, using a burner signal from Crowley's taunts in the duplex video. He hotwired a pickup from a gas station, its engine growling as he climbed winding roads, pine forests, swallowing the moonlight, the air crisp with altitude. The compound sprawled ahead, a fortified nest of log cabins and razor-wire floodlights casting harsh pools across the dirt. 15 Patriots patrolled, their hoodies stained with soot rifles, slung loose, their laughter, a grating snarl as they swigged moonshine from mason jars. Malcolm circled east, flanking the perimeter, where a drainage pipe sagged under a hill, a blind spot in their drunken watch. His heart hammered, Aisha's cries echoing in his skull as he crawled through the muck, its stench clinging to his clothes, emerging behind a woodpile pistol, drawn its silencer, a whisper of death. The first guard, a lanky thug with a mullet, stood 30 feet off, scratching his arm, oblivious, as Malcolm fired a muted shot, punching through his skull, blood splattering the logs as he crumpled. He moved like a wraith, taking the second, a stocky man with a goatee, with a knife to the throat, his gurgle lost in the wind. The main cabin loomed, its log walls weathered, a faint sob leaking through the cracks. Malcolm's pulse spiked, Aisha alive, pulling him closer as he breached the back door, pistol raised. Inside, 10 Patriots sprawled around a fire pit, whiskey bottles littering the floor, their rifles propped against walls. Aisha sat bound in the corner, her wrists roped to a beam, her braids tangled, blood crusting her swollen shoulder, her sharp eyes flashing defiance. Crowley paced nearby, his scarred face twisted with glee, a machete twirling in his grip, barking slurs. "Your brother's a dead man, bitch, time to bleed." Malcolm struck a one-man army, unleashed his first shot, dropping a Patriot through the chest, blood spraying the fire as the others scrambled. He rolled behind a table, firing thrice more, 3 collapsing with holes in their skulls, and hearts their screams cut short. Crowley spun, machete slashing air, but Malcolm dove low, his knife arcing into the mercenary's thigh, tearing flesh. The sadist roared, crashing down, machete skittering, as Malcolm pinned him, snapping his arm with a twist bone snapping like dry wood. The last 4 lunged, rifles raised, but Malcolm's pistol barked, 4 bullets blooming in their chests, dropping them in heaps. He cut Aisha free, her sobs muffled, as the ropes fell her wiry frame, leaning into his chest, blood smearing his vest. "Malcolm, I knew you'd come," she rasped, her voice cracking as he lifted her, his sister's weight a lifeline in the chaos. "Always." He planted evidence, a burner phone loaded with texts linking Shaw to Crowley, shoving it into a dead Patriot's pocket, a breadcrumb for the law. They slipped out the back as sirens wailed faint in the valley, too slow to catch the ghost. He carried Aisha through the pines, her breath ragged but steady, Jalen and Micah safe with Isaiah at a neighbor's. He'd hoped. By one they hit a hideout 10 miles east, a rusted trailer in a clearing, its tin roof dented but intact. Malcolm set Aisha on a cot, its springs groaning, bandaging her shoulder, with a kit from the duffel, her skin hot under his fingers. Isaiah ran, in from the back, reunited by Ruth's kin, his small arms wrapping tight around Malcolm's neck. "Dad, you got her," he choked, tears brimming as Aisha hugged him back, her sharp eyes softening. Malcolm powered up the laptop, uploading the planted evidence to Jake's subject line, Shaw's Patriot bloodbath. By 2, the story broke, grainy footage of the compound, paired with the texts Shaw and Crowley indicted for terrorism, their faces on every screen as protests swelled nationwide. Malcolm watched from the trailer TV, Isaiah nestled beside him, Aisha sipping water, her wiry frame steady, a win forged in blood and grit. He'd stormed the compound, killed 15 men, freed his sister, thought they'd ended Shaw's reign. Ruth's cousin, a stout woman named Clara, nodded from the kitchen, her shotgun propped nearby. "You're a damn storm, Carter, they're done." The trailer grew, still crickets chirping outside, as Malcolm checked his pistol, its silencer gleaming in the lamplight. He'd broken Shaw's spine, thought the indictments bought them time to vanish. North Montgomery's cousins waiting. The precinct reeled Shaw, and Crowley locked up Malcolm, believing they'd slip free, start over. He stood stretching his legs, the plan solidifying as Isaiah's breathing steadied beside Aisha, a rare calm settling over them. They'd rest an hour, then move. He'd bury this nightmare tonight. But at 3, the air shifted, a news ticker crawling across the screen, FBI labels. Georgia rescue terrorist attack suspect Malcolm Carter, warlord, loose in the South. His stomach dropped, his hand snapping to the pistol, as the anchor, a smug man in a black suit, read the smear. Carter's Delta past confirms 20 kills overseas, a rogue killer orchestrating chaos. Malcolm's file flashed on screen, missions, twisted into a lie, a black man branded a warlord. He stood pacing the trailer's warped floor, his shadow stretching as Isaiah stirred. "Dad, they're lying again?" He knelt, brushing Isaiah's hair, his voice steady despite the storm. "Yeah, little man, but we'll fight it." The lie burned as drones hummed overhead, their whir cutting the night. Crowley breaking out on bail, leading a kill squad to their door. The trailer trembled, tires screeching outside, as floodlights pierced the windows, red beams dancing across the walls. Crowley's voice roared from the clearing. "Endgame, Carter, you're mine." Sentinels swarmed, rifles raised their hoodies, patched with hate, a death squad unleashed by Shaw's cash. Malcolm dove, shielding Isaiah and Aisha, as bullets shredded the tin wall's sparks, flying smoke choking their lungs. He fired back 2 shots, dropping a sentinel through the chest, blood spraying the floor, but they were too many, a wall of racist fury closing in. Aisha grabbed a knife from the cot, slashing at a thug who breached the door, her wiry arm trembling as he fell gurgling. Isaiah sobbed behind Malcolm, his small frame trembling as drones buzzed lower, their cameras live streaming the assault, a racist spectacle painting Malcolm a warlord on every screen. Drop a comment with number 1 if you think Malcolm's blood-soaked rescue proves he's a warrior beyond breaking, or number 2 if you reckon Crowley's kill squad will finally crush his fight. Press like if Aisha's defiance against these monsters lights a fire in you, and subscribe because tomorrow's chapter unleashes a storm you can't predict. Will Malcolm outsmart a drone-lit death trap, or has Shaw's empire struck its deadliest blow yet? Stay tuned to see how this nightmare twists next. Malcolm Carter crouched behind the trailer's smoldering couch, his blistered hands gripping the pistol, as bullets chewed through the tin wall's, sparks flying in the Alabama night. Ethan Crowley's kill squad swarmed outside, their rifles blazing. Red beams from drones slicing the dark alive feed, branding him a warlord on every screen. Isaiah huddled beside him, the boy's small frame trembling, his split lip bleeding anew as Aisha slashed at a sentinel breaching the door, her knife tearing. The thug's throat, his gurgle lost in the chaos. The trailer shook its rusted frame, groaning, as Malcolm fired back 2 shots, dropping a shooter through the chest, blood spraying the warped floor. He'd rigged traps before the assault tripwires scavenged from the duffel, snapping taut as a sentinel. Tripped a grenade, its blast shredding the porch into splinters. 3 more collapsing in a heap, their screams swallowed by the roar. Aisha ducked low, her wiry arm trembling as she wiped blood from her blade, her sharp eyes darting to Malcolm. "They're too many, we're pinned." He nodded, his 6'3" frame coiled, scanning the back window where drones buzzed lower. There were a death knell in the humid air. "Not yet, we move." He grabbed Isaiah, shoving him toward the rear, the boy's sneakers skidding on the linoleum as Malcolm kicked out the window glass, shattering into the night. He boosted Aisha through, her braids snagging on the frame, then followed with Isaiah in his arms, hitting the dirt rolling behind a rusted barrel as bullets stitched the ground. Crowley loomed in the clearing, his scarred face twisted with glee, firing a rifle burst that sparked the barrel. Malcolm returning shots, the silencer, spitting 2 rounds into the mercenary's thigh, blood blooming as he roared, crashing down. Malcolm, lunged, knife arcing from his sleeve, a delta trick, burying it deep in Crowley's chest. The blade piercing lung, the sadist's gasp, wet as he slumped, eyes wide in death. The sentinels faltered, their leader gone, rifles wavering as Malcolm fired thrice more, dropping 3 in sprays of red, their hoodies patched with hate-soaked crimson. Aisha snatched a fallen rifle, unloading into the last 2, their bodies jerking. As they fell, the drones buzzing overhead, capturing it all, a racist spectacle twisting his fight into terror. He led them into the pines, Isaiah's 12 pounds a lifeline, Aisha limping beside him, her shoulder leaking blood anew. By 4, they hit a creek bed 5 miles east, its banks thick with mud shielding them from the drone's glare. As Malcolm powered up the burner, its screen cracked but alive. He hacked a body cam from a dead sentinel, uploading the footage to Jake Graney clips of Crowley's attack. His death at Malcolm's hands tagged Carter's truth. The feed hit the dark web, protests flaring nationwide as hashtags like End the Lie trended, forcing the FBI to back off their warlord smear by dawn newsrooms, retracting the label under public rage. Malcolm moved them north, slipping through the woods to a new safe house, a clapboard shed in a cotton field 10 miles out, its tin roof dented but intact. Aisha slumped on a crate, her wiry frame steadying as she bandaged her shoulder with a rag. Isaiah curling beside her, his brown eyes heavy but trusting. Malcolm checked the burner, the story holding Crowley's death a crack in Shaw's empire, the precinct reeling as he rigged the shed with traps wire and nails scavenged from the duffel, a fortress for their fragile peace. He'd killed the squad, saved his family, thought they'd bought time to vanish, North Montgomery's cousins waiting. The shed grew still, crickets chirping outside as Malcolm sat beside Isaiah, brushing the boy's hair, his deep voice soft. "We're okay, little man, they're running scared." Aisha nodded, sipping water from a canteen, her sharp eyes softening. "You're a damn storm, Malcolm, maybe we've won." He allowed himself a breath, thinking they'd dodged the noose, the system, cracking as Isaiah's breathing steadied, a rare calm settling over them. He'd go north tonight, move them all under cover of dark, start over where the drones couldn't reach the plane, solidifying his mind, easing as Aisha patched his hands with gauze. But at 6, the air trembled, a low rumble swelling into a roar as pickup trucks roared into the field, a 1,000-strong lynch mob, their Confederate flags flapping, rifles gleaming in the dawn. Harold Vance Shaw's silent partner, a billionaire with a private hate network, had leaked Malcolm's location to every racist cell from Georgia to Texas, a tidal wave of vengeance for Crowley's fall. Malcolm bolted to the window, his vest snapping, tight as Isaiah woke sobbing. Aisha grabbing her knife, her wiry frame rigid with fury. "They found us how?" Malcolm fired through the glass, 2 shots dropping a thug with a mullet, blood spraying the cotton. As the mob surged, boots stomping, dirt voices, howling slurs, nigger killer, a racist chant shaking the shed. He rigged a trap mid-fight, a wire snapping. Tart blasting 5 with scavenged nails, their screams piercing the dawn as he unloaded the pistol, dropping 3 more, their rifles useless in the chaos. Aisha swung her knife, slashing a thug's arm, her blood-smeared face a mask of defiance, but the mob pressed closer, a wall of hate too vast to stem. He fought off waves, his pistol barking bullets, punching through hoodies and skulls, blood soaking. The dirt as Isaiah hid behind a crate, his small hands trembling, Aisha beside him, her knife flashing. But a stray round caught her chest, her gasp a wet choke as she fell. Malcolm roaring, dragging her to cover, his hands slick with her blood pressing. The wound as Isaiah screamed Auntie Aisha, her eyes fluttering, her breath shallow. He shouted into the burner, calling Clara, their last ally, 20 miles off, but sirens wailed, closing in, cops joining the mob, their lights slashing the field, a racist alliance sealing their doom. The shed trembled, bullets shredding the tin as cops swarmed, rifles raised, Hicks barking orders, his squat frame bristling with glee. "Malcolm Carter, you're under arrest, murder of civilians." Malcolm froze, pistol empty. Aisha dying in his arms as Hicks stepped closer, his smirk a twisted scar. "Shot up a peaceful crowd, huh? Your sister's collateral." Isaiah sobbed, lunging at Hicks, his small fists pounding, but a cop wrenched him away, shoving him toward a cruiser. "He didn't do it, he saved us," the boy screamed. But Hicks laughed, cuffing Malcolm's wrists, the metal biting deep into his raw flesh. They dragged him outside, the dawn air cool against his singed skin, as the mob cheered, 1,000 voices, howling justice, their rifles raised in triumph. Cops spinning the scene on live TV, a news chopper circling its feed, hitting screens nationwide. "Georgia mob attacked Delta vet Malcolm Carter, apprehended for murder," the anchor droned, framing. "Him a killer in seconds." Aisha's blood pooling on the dirt, her pulse fading as medics stood by, refusing aid, their slurs. "Black bitch, a final cut." Malcolm sat in the van, his head throbbing, blood trickling down his neck as Hicks slammed the door. His squat frame silhouetted against the mob's glow. Isaiah's cries echoed as cops hauled him off Clara, too late to reach them, the boy vanishing. Into the system's claws, Jalen and Micah's fates unknown. The precinct loomed ahead, a grey fortress swallowing him whole, Malcolm's vest heavy, his mind racing, a ghost snared, but alive, plotting a strike they'd never see. He'd killed Crowley, rigged the traps, thought the FBI retreat bought them peace. But Vance's mob flipped it, a racist tidal wave, tearing Aisha away, pinning her death on him. The cops twisted it live, a black man, branded a murderer again, racism. A noose tightening around his neck, a war he couldn't outrun yet. Malcolm Carter slumped in the precinct van, his wrists raw from the cuffs cutting into his blistered flesh as the engine growled through the Alabama dawn. Aisha's blood stained his hands, her lifeless body, a searing wound left bleeding in the cotton field shed, the 1,000-strong lynch mob's cheers still ringing in his ears. So Isaiah's cries echoed, the boy torn from his arms by cops, their slurs, little thug, a racist taunt. As Hicks smirked through the window, the precinct looming ahead, a grey fortress swallowing him whole. The TV blared outside, Malcolm Carter, mob killer, apprehended, a lie spinning live as the mob's rifles gleamed in the chopper's feed. His head throbbed, blood crusting his neck from the firefight, but his mind stayed sharp, a steel trap forging a breakout. He'd killed Crowley, thought the FBI retreat bought them peace, but Harold Vance's mob flipped it, tearing Aisha away, pinning her death on him. The van jolted to a stop, precinct guards shouting as a riot swelled outside, protest chants clashing with cop sirens, a chaos he could use. He worked the shiv hidden in his sleeve, its jagged edge snapping the cuff free, his wrist bleeding but loose as Hicks turned, barking at the driver. Malcolm lunged, slamming the shiv into Hicks's throat, blood spraying the seat as the cop gurgled. Crashing back, pistol clattering. The driver swung a baton, but Malcolm snapped his arm with a twist bone cracking as he drove a knee into his chest, dropping him in a heap. He kicked the door open, rolling onto the pavement as protesters swarmed. The lot, their signs locked them up, a shield against the guards' rifles. He sprinted into the crowd, his vest chafing, his 6'3" frame a shadow in the dawn, his breath ragged but steady. By 7, he tracked shore to a fortified estate in Montgomery, 90 miles south, using a burner signal from Crowley's dark webcoms, a thread he'd traced through the chaos. He hotwired a sedan from a gas station, its engine roaring as he sped through backroads, cotton fields, blurring past the air thick with morning dew. The estate sprawled ahead, a white-columned mansion ringed by brick walls and floodlights guards. patrolling with shotguns, their chatter laced with slurs about the black warlord they'd crushed. Malcolm parked a mile out, cutting through a pecan grove, its branches heavy, shielding him from the dawn's glare. He circled north, flanking the perimeter, where a storm drain sagged under a ditch, a blind spot in their lazy watch. His heart hammered, Isaiah's cries echoing in his skull as he crawled through the muck, its stench clinging to his clothes, emerging behind a tool-shed pistol, drawn its silencer a whisper of death. The first guard, a wiry thug with a buzz cut, stood 20 feet off, smoking a cigar, oblivious, as Malcolm fired a muted shot, punching through his skull blood, splattering the shed as he crumpled. He moved like a phantom, taking the second, a beefy man with a ponytail with a knife to the throat, his gurgle lost in the breeze. The mansion loomed, its oak doors gleaming, a faint hum of voices leaking through the walls. Malcolm's pulse spiked, Shaw inside pulling him closer. As he breached the side entrance, pistol raised. Inside, 10 guards sprawled around a marble foyer, whiskey glasses littering a table, their shotguns propped against chairs. He struck a one-man army, unleashed his first shot, dropping a guard through the chest, blood spraying the tile as the others scrambled. He rolled behind a pillar, firing thrice more, 3 collapsing with holes in their skulls and hearts their screams. Cut short. The last 6 lunged, shotguns raised, but Malcolm tossed a grenade from his vest, its blast shredding the foyer into rubble, dropping them in heaps. He climbed the stairs, his boots silent on the carpet, tracking Shaw to a study, its oak desk, piled with cash and files. Vernon Shaw's barrel-chested frame hunched over a phone, barking orders, his voice thick with rage. Malcolm kicked the door wide, pistol trained, as Shaw spun, laughing a guttural taunt, his buzz cut slick with sweat. "You're a dead man, Carter. Vance runs this now." Malcolm's eyes narrowed, his finger steady on the trigger. "Not after this." Shaw smirked, reaching for a pistol, but Malcolm fired twice, bullets punching through his chest and forehead, blood blooming as he slumped, dead eyes wide in defeat. Malcolm rifled the desk, planting evidence, a USB drive loaded with Vance's hate. Network logs linking Shaw to the billionaire's mob, shoving it into Shaw's pocket, a breadcrumb for the law. He slipped out the back, hiding Isaiah nearby in the grove, the boy's small frame curled under a tarp. Ruth's cousin Clara guarding him since the shed. They hit a forest hideout 10 miles east, a clapboard shack nestled in pines, its tin roof dented but intact by 9. Malcolm set Isaiah on a cot, its springs groaning, checking his lip with a cloth, the blood clotting under gentle pressure, as Clara brewed tea, her stout frame steady. By 10, the story broke, grainy footage of Shaw's estate, paired with the logs Vance arrested outside his Buckhead penthouse, his billionaire empire crumbling as protests swelled nationwide. Malcolm watched from the shack TV, Isaiah nestled beside. Him, his small chest steady, a win forged in blood and grit. He'd stormed the estate, killed Shaw, thought they'd ended the war. Clara nodded from the kitchen, her shotgun propped nearby. "You're a damn force, Carter. They're done." Malcolm brushed Isaiah's hair, his deep voice soft. "We're free, little man." The shack grew still, crickets chirping outside as Malcolm checked his pistol, its silencer gleaming in the lamplight. He'd broken Shaw's reign, thought Vance's. Arrest brought them peace to vanish, North cousins waiting in Tennessee, now Montgomery too hot. The precinct reeled, the system cracking, Malcolm believing they'd slip free, start over. He stood, stretching his legs, the plan solidifying as Isaiah's breathing steadied, a rare calm settling over them. They'd rest an hour, then move. He'd bury this nightmare tonight. But at 11, the air trembled, a high-pitched whine swelling into a roar as drones struck from above, their missiles blasting the shack into flames, orange tongues licking the pines. Malcolm dove, shielding Isaiah, debris raining heat, searing his raw hands. As Clara's scream cut through the chaos, her stout form thrown clear, shotgun skidding. Isaiah coughed, eyes streaming, as Malcolm dragged him from the wreckage, the boys, small hands clutching his vest, blood trickling from a gash on his arm. "Dad, they're back." Malcolm's ears rang, his pistol drawn as smoke choked the air drones, buzzing lower, their red eyes glinting. Vance's private army unleashed even from custody, a racist claw striking back. He fired 2 shots, sparking a drone's hull, but they were too many, a swarm of steel raining fire cutting their path. Clara staggered up, her grey hair singed, clutching her side, as Malcolm carried Isaiah into the woods, the boy's sneakers dangling, his voice cracking. "They won't stop, Dad." Malcolm set him down, checking the gash, His own hands blistered as sirens wailed faint, but closing cops too late to matter. He led them deeper into the pines, Isaiah's 12 pounds a lifeline, Clara limping beside him, her breath ragged but steady. The shack burned a pyre for their refuge flames licking the sky as drones circled overhead, their live feed hitting screens nationwide. Malcolm Carter terrorist hideout bombed a lie spinning fresh. He'd killed Shaw exposed. Vance thought the arrest ended it, but the drones flipped it, a racist trap wounding Isaiah, turning victory to ash. The cops would twist it too, pinning the blast on him. A black man branded a killer again, racism, a noose tightening around his neck. He sank against a pine, his vest heavy, his mind racing, a ghost alive, but bleeding, plotting a strike they'd never see. Vance's army struck from the shadows, a billionaire's wrath unbound by cuffs, the system shielding him even now. Isaiah's gash oozed, his small hand trembling as Clara tore her sleeve, binding it, her stout hands steady despite the pain. Malcolm stood, his shadow stretching through the trees, a warrior cornered but unbroken. They'd taken Aisha, wounded his son, thought they'd won, but he'd tear through hell to prove them wrong. Malcolm Carter crouched in the Alabama pines, his blistered hands pressing a torn sleeve to Isaiah's gash, the boy's small arm oozing blood through the makeshift bandage. The forest shack burned a mile back, its flames a beacon in the dawn as drones buzzed overhead, their missiles a parting gift from Harold Vance's private army. Clara limped beside them, her stout frame trembling, her grey hair singed from the blast, her shotgun lost in the wreckage. Isaiah's brown eyes fluttered, his 12-year-old voice a whisper against Malcolm's chest. "Dad, it hurts." Malcolm's 6'3" frame tensed, his vest heavy with soot as he brushed the boy's hair. "Hang on, little man, I've got you." His ears rang from the explosion, his pistol drawn but near empty as he led them deeper into the woods, the canopy thick with shadows, shielding them from the drone's red glare. Clara's breath came in sharp gasps, her ankle twisted in the chaos, but she kept pace, her stout hands steadying Isaiah's shoulder. The drones circled, their live feed hitting screens nationwide. Malcolm Carter terrorist hideout bombed a racist lie spinning fresh as sirens wailed faint, but closing cops too late to matter. He'd killed Shaw exposed, Vance thought the arrest brought them peace, but the drones flipped it, wounding his son, turning victory to ash. By 7 they hit a cave hollowed into a limestone bluff, its mouth veiled by vines, a damp refuge from the sky's steel eyes. Malcolm set Isaiah on a slab of rock, its surface cool against the boy's fevered skin, checking the gash with a med kit from his vest, the blood clotting under gauze as he stitched it tight. Clara sank against the wall, her stout frame slumping, as she tore her sleeve wider, binding her own cuts, her grey eyes sharp with resolve. "They're hunting us, Malcolm. How'd they find us?" He powered up the burner, its screen cracked but flickering, hacking a dark web forum where he leaked Vance's drone orders audio of the billionaire's voice, make it quick-traced from Shaw's files. The feed hit servers by 8 grainy clips of the shack's ruin, paired with Vance's cold rasp protests, flaring nationwide as hashtags like Vance drones trended from Mobile to Memphis. Malcolm watched the burners glow dim, Isaiah dozing beside him, Clara guarding the cave mouth with a stick, her shotgun gone a win forged in desperation. The news shifted Vance's empire, crumbling, his arrest warrant issued by 9, Malcolm thinking they'd turned the tide. He patched Isaiah's arm, his deep voice soft as he brushed the boy's hair. "We're fighting back, little man, they're losing." Clara nodded, sipping water from a canteen, her stout frame steadying. "You're a damn wall carter, maybe we've got 'em." He allowed himself a breath, thinking they'd dodged the drones, the system cracking as Isaiah's breathing steadied, a rare calm settling over the cave. He'd go north tonight, move them to Tennessee cousins waiting beyond Montgomery's heat, the plan solidifying, his mind easing as Clara patched his hands with moss. But at 10, the air shifted, a low hum, swelling into a roar as a sniper team struck. From the bluff's edge, their scopes glinting in the morning sun. Vance's final failsafe, a mercenary kill squad, unbound by his cuffs. Malcolm dove, shielding Isaiah, as bullets punched the cave walls, limestone dust choking their lungs. Clara swinging her stick at a shadow, breaching the mouth, her stout arm cracking a thug's jaw. He fell gurgling, but 3 more stormed in rifles, blazing their black tactical gear patched with Vance's logo. a racist claw slashing through their refuge. Malcolm fired his last 2 shots, dropping one through the chest, blood spraying the slab as he rolled, snatching a fallen rifle its barrel, hot in his grip. He unloaded into the second, a burst shredding his skull brain matter, splattering the vines. As the third lunged, bayonet raised, Malcolm sidestepping, driving the rifle butt into his throat, the crack sharp as he crumpled. Clara screamed from the back, a 4th sniper, dragging her out, her stout frame kicking as he hauled her into the sun. Her grey hair a tangled flag in his fist. Malcolm bolted after her rifle raised, but a 5th shadow struck from the side, a sniper. With a shaved head slamming a pistol into his temple, stars exploding in his vision as he hit the dirt. Isaiah sobbed, lunging from the slab, his small fists pounding the thug, but a boot cracked his ribs, dropping him whimpering beside Malcolm. The sniper towered over them, his shaved head gleaming, a note pinned to his vest, Vance's scrawl. "You lose a taunt from the billionaire's shadows." He dragged Isaiah outside the boy's sneakers, scraping limestone as Malcolm staggered up, blood trickling down his neck, pistol lost in the chaos. He stumbled to the cave mouth, the sniper team retreating to a black SUV 50 yards off Isaiah, bound in the back, his small frame trembling. Clara slumped beside him, her stout face bruised, but alive. Malcolm roared, charging bare-handed, but a bullet tore through his chest, blood blooming as he crashed to his knees, the sniper's rifle smoking from a distant ridge 100 yards east. The shooter vanished into the pines, no trace, no sound as the SUV peeled away tires, screeching gravel dust billowing in the morning light. Malcolm clawed the dirt, his vest heavy, his breath a wet rasp as Isaiah's screams pierced the air. "Dad, help me," fading with the engine's growl. Clara's stout form slumped silent, a hostage in Vance's grip, the sniper a ghost striking when he thought he'd won. He'd patched Isaiah, thought the leak turned it, but the kill squad flipped it, a racist. Trap snatching his son, leaving him bleeding in the dust. His vision blurred, hands trembling as he dragged himself to the burner, its screen flickering, uploading the sniper's retreat to Jake, subject line, Vance's last shot. By 11, the story broke, grainy clips of the SUV, paired with the note, Vance's. Empire teetering as protests swelled nationwide, but Malcolm's strength bled out his chest, a furnace of pain. He'd killed Shaw, exposed Vance, thought they'd slip free. But the sniper struck, a racist blade cutting deeper than drones, pinning the cave attack on him. A black man, branded a killer again. The news chopper circled its feed live. Malcolm Carter. Terrorist ambush foiled, a lie spinning fresh as cops closed in their sirens, a death knell in the pines. He sank against a pine, his vest soaked his mind, racing, a ghost alive but fading, plotting a strike they'd never see. Vance's sniper tested him, drew him out, struck when he thought he'd won, a billionaire's wrath unbound by bars, the system shielding him even now. Isaiah's gash flashed in his skull, his son's cries a fuel he couldn't unhear, as Clara vanished too, her stout resolve a casualty in Vance's war. Malcolm stood swaying, his shadow stretching through the trees, a warrior bleeding but unbroken. They'd taken his son, thought they'd buried him, but he'd tear through hell to prove them wrong. He tracked the SUV's signal, a faint ping from the burner, narrowing it to a rural clinic 5 miles north, a clapboard shack with a red cross peeling on its door. He hot-wired a pickup from a farmstead, its engine coughing as he sped through back roads, blood soaking his shirt, his breath shallow, but steady. The clinic loomed by noon, its lot empty, but for the black SUV dust settling around its tires. Malcolm crashed through the door, pistol snatched from a dead sniper in hand. His vest a crimson rag as he breached the exam room expecting Vance's goons. But the doctor, a wiry man with a grey beard, lay dead, throat-slit, blood pooling on the tile. Isaiah bound to a gurney, his small frame trembling. Clara slumped in a corner. Her stout hands tied her grey eyes wide with terror. The sniper with the shaved head stood over them, rifle raised, his shaved scalp gleaming, a smirk twisting his lips. "Vance says goodbye, Carter," he rasped, kicking the gurney. Isaiah's sob, a dagger in Malcolm's chest. He fired the pistol. Empty clicking as the sniper laughed, dodging the shot, lunging with a bayonet. Malcolm too slow, blood pouring from his chest as he crashed to the floor. Malcolm Carter staggered from the clinic's blood-smeared floor, his chest a furnace of pain blood, soaking his tattered vest as the sniper's bullet burned through his ribs. The wiry doctor lay dead, throat slit, a crimson pool spreading across the tile. While Isaiah's cries faded with the black SUV's roar, the boy snatched by Vance's last sniper. Clara bound beside him, her stout frame a silent hostage. Malcolm's blistered hands trembled, clutching the stolen pistol, its clip empty. His 6'3" frame swaying as he lurched outside the Alabama noon sun, glaring off the clappered shack's peeling red cross. His breath came in wet rasps, his vision blurring, but his mind stayed sharp, a steel trap, locking on the SUV's dust trail snaking north. He dragged himself to the hot-wired pickup, its engine coughing to life as he floored it through backroads gravel, crunching under bald tires, blood dripping onto the seat, his pulse a war drum in his ears. The burner buzzed in his pocket, its screen cracked but flickering a faint ping, tracing the sniper's route to Vance's private bunker 20 miles out, a concrete fortress buried in Pine Hills. Malcolm's Delta instincts flared, plotting entry points, kill zones, escape routes, his hands steady on the wheel despite the crimson staining his knuckles. He'd patched Isaiah, thought the leak turned it, but the sniper flipped it a racist trap, snatching his son, leaving him bleeding in the dust. By one he reached the bunker, cutting the engine a half-mile out, crawling through brambles, the thorns tearing his scorched skin, as drones hummed faint overhead, their red eyes dormant in the daylight. The fortress loomed a squat slab of grey, ringed by razor-wire floodlights, dark, but primed its guards patrolling with rifles, their chatter laced with slurs about the black terrorist they'd crushed. Malcolm circled west, flanking the perimeter, where a vent sagged under a ridge, a blind spot in their lazy watch, his heart hammering, Isaiah's sobs echoing in his skull, pulling him closer. He squeezed through the vent, its steel scraping his bleeding chest, emerging in a maintenance bay. Its air-thick with oil and rust pistol raised its silencer, a whisper of death. The first guard, a lanky thug with a mullet, stood 30 feet off fiddling with a radio, oblivious, as Malcolm fired a scavenged round, punching through his skull, blood splattering the concrete as he crumpled. He moved like a wraith, taking the second, a stocky man with a goatee with a knife to the throat, his gurgle lost in the hum of generators, his body dragged behind a crate, boots silent on the slick floor. The bunker's core loomed, a steel vault, its door ajar, a faint whimper leaking through the cracks. Malcolm's pulse spiked, Isaiah alive, drawing him in as he breached the threshold, pistol trained. Inside, 5 snipers sprawled around a control room, monitors glowing with drone feeds, their rifles propped against consoles. Isaiah sat bound to a chair, his wrists zip-tied his small frame, trembling, blood oozing from his gash. Clara slumped nearby, her stout hands roped her grey eyes wide with terror. The sniper with the shaved head stood over them, rifle raised, his shaved scalp gleaming, barking slurs. "Your daddy's bleeding out, kid, time to watch you break." Malcolm struck a one-man army barely alive, his first shot dropping a sniper through the chest, blood spraying the screens as the others scrambled. He rolled behind a console, firing twice more, 2 collapsing with holes in their skulls and throats, their screams cut short. The shaved-head sniper spun, rifle blasting, the wall sparks flying, as Malcolm dove low, his knife arcing into the man's thigh, tearing muscle, the thug roaring, crashing down, rifle skittering. The last 2 lunged, rifles raised, but Malcolm's pistol barked 2 bullets blooming in their chests, dropping them in heaps, blood pooling on the steel. He tackled the shaved-head sniper, pinning him, knife slashing his wrist, the blade biting deep, blood spraying as the rifle fell useless. The man thrashed, gasping, but Malcolm drove the hilt into his temple bone, crunching as he slumped, eyes wide in death. He cut Isaiah free, the boy sobbing, as the zip ties snapped, his small arms wrapping tight around Malcolm's neck, blood smearing his vest. "Dad, you came," he choked Malcolm, lifting him, his 12 pounds a lifeline in the chaos. "Always, little man." He untied Clara, her stout frame leaning into him, her grey eyes fluttering, blood crusting her bruised cheek. Malcolm staggered to the consoles, his chest a furnace, uploading the bunker's feeds to Jake, live streaming the rescue grainy clips of Isaiah's bruises, Clara's terror, hitting servers nationwide, tagged Vance's final lie. Alarms screamed, red lights flashing as he rifled a desk, uncovering Vance's true plan. A file-stamped project cleanse, a staged coup to frame Malcolm's death, as a black uprising, sparking nationwide crackdowns on minorities, billions funneled to private militias. A racist endgame hidden in plain sight. His hands shook, blood dripping onto the pages, as he synced the file to the feed, sending it live, his breath shallow, but steady. By 2, the story broke, protests erupting, globally grainy footage of the bunker, paired with cleansed docs, Vance's empire, collapsing as newsrooms screamed billionaire coup exposed. Malcolm sank to the floor, Isaiah clinging to him, Clara guarding the door, her stout frame steadying a snatched rifle, the world raging as his strength bled out. He'd stormed the bunker, freed his son, thought this could end it, his chest a crimson. Drank, his vision dimming as Isaiah's small hands pressed his wound, tears streaming. "Stay with me, Dad," the boy choked, but Malcolm's breath faltered, a wet rasp fading in the steel vault. He grabbed Isaiah's hand, his grip weak but firm, his deep voice a whisper, "You're strong, little man, fight them." Isaiah nodded, sobbing, as Malcolm's eyes dimmed, a faint smile curling his lips, knowing his son would carry the torch, a new ghost born from his blood. His chest stilled, the pistol clattering from his hand, the world's rage a distant roar as Clara knelt, cursing, her stout hands trembling, rifle slipping. The bunker grew silent, monitors flickering. Vance's coup consuming his legacy, Malcolm's death a spark igniting the next war. Isaiah staggered up, his small frame shaking, tearing the burner free, uploading the final clip himself, his father's lifeless body, a testament to the fight, grainy footage hitting screens as he fled with Clara, her stout arm around him, vanishing into the pines. By 3, the feed went global, Vance's empire ash, his silent partners scrambling, as protests swelled, governments cracking under the truth, a black man's sacrifice exposing a racist hydra too vast to kill. Isaiah's sneakers crunched gravel, his brown eyes hard rage replacing fear, a vow forming in his young heart to haunt them as his father had. The pines swallowed them, Clara's stout resolve a shield as they slipped north, cousins waiting in Tennessee, now a lifeline in the chaos. Malcolm lay still in the bunker, his vest a crimson shroud, his shadow stretching beyond the steel, a ghost slipping away but unbroken. He'd stormed in, freed them all, thought the world's rage would shield them. But Vance's coup flipped it, a racist blade striking when he thought he'd won, leaving Isaiah to carry the war. The news shifted. Malcolm Carter killed in standoff, a lie, buried by the truth, the sniper's masters, unseen, a hydra, with heads uncounted. Isaiah stared out from a ridge, Clara's arm around him, his small chest heaving, blood crusting his gash, a child forged in loss, ready to strike. Malcolm had beaten Shaw, killed Crowley, exposed. Vance thought the arrest sealed it, but the sniper struck a test, drawing him out, ripping him away, a racist endgame, leaving his son the heir, a legacy of rage no one could quench. The Alabama noon pressed, down heavy, and still the bunker a tomb, Vance's empire ash. But the war unended, a boy's vow, a fire burning through the pines. Malcolm Carter's journey through a storm of systemic racism reveals raw truths about resilience and sacrifice. A retired Delta Force legend, he fights not just for survival, but for his son Isaiah, showing that love can fuel a war against hate. His victories, exposing corrupt cops, dismantling militias, toppling a billionaire's empire, shine as beacons of courage, yet each triumph meets fiercer retaliation, underscoring how deeply prejudice roots itself in power structures. The betrayal by Reverend Monroe, coerced by threats, highlights trust's fragility when fear grips even the faithful, a stark reminder that allies can falter under pressure. Malcolm's death by a sniper's bullet, leaving Isaiah to carry the fight, drives home a haunting lesson. Individual wins can't uproot a system built on bias overnight. It's a cycle of resistance and loss, where justice remains a shadow, not a finish line. Isaiah's vow to continue his father's battle speaks to legacy, showing how one generation's struggle ignites the next. The unseen mastermind behind Vance exposes racism's insidious layers, a hydra growing new heads. When one falls, urging us to look beyond surface victories and question who truly holds power. Malcolm's story teaches that strength can blaze through crushing injustice, but the cost, losing Aisha, Terrence, and his own life, reveals the brutal price of defiance. It's a call to stand firm, even when the odds stack higher with every blow, and to recognize that the fight against hate is a marathon, not a sprint. What's the biggest takeaway for you? Drop a comment with your thoughts. Does resilience outlast the system, or does the system always reclaim its ground? Press like if Malcolm's sacrifice stirs you, subscribe for more tales of grit and justice, and share to spark this conversation. Thanks for joining this journey through Alabama's shadows. Here's to a world where courage topples hate, one story at a time.